Good evening, my dear people of God. Good evening, brothers and sisters. I am Reverend Father Jude Erigha, a Catholic priest from Catholic Diocese of Olo. I am the parish priest of St. Thomas Aquinas, Catholic Parish, Owerenkwoji. I'm here this evening to reflect briefly on the theme, Negative Influences of the Ego in Our Daily Lives. This will be done with a biblical passage of the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 18, from verses 9 to 14. I read, Jesus spoke this parable to some who were self-confidently sure that they were righteous, who despised others. Two men went up to the temple to pray. The one was a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, O God, I thank thee that I am not as the rest of men, thieves, unjust, and adulterers, and even as this collector. I fast once a week. I give a tenth of all that I get. But the tax collector stood afar off, and would not lift even his eyes to heaven, and kept beating his breast, and said, O God, be merciful to me, the sinner. I tell you, this man, that is the tax collector, went down to his house accepted with God, rather than the other, who is the Pharisee. Because everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. Who is a Pharisee? A Pharisee is a member of an ancient Jewish political party, a social movement, and a school of thought among Jews. He is a person who values the letter of the law over its spirit or intention. That is why Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 from verses 1 to 16 calls them hypocrites who teach what they don't practice. Jesus warned that we should not imitate or behave like them in some areas of life, namely almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. They do those things just to show off and pretend to be pious, but in truth are far away from God. Jesus, in Luke chapter 11 verse 39, or Matthew chapter 23 verse 25, told them, Woe to you Pharisees, woe to you hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but within they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Jesus went ahead in Matthew chapter 23 verse 27 to call them white-painted sepulchre, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead. A Pharisee is proud, arrogant, insolent, egoistic, scornful, and haughty. From a biblical passage we read at the beginning, we can see that the Pharisee did not really pray to God. He prayed with himself. True prayer is always offered to God and to God alone. He did not go to pray. He only went to inform God how good he was. He went to show and exhibit his ego before God. He is simply egoistic. Here in this parable, Jesus wants us to teach us the importance of praying with the right attitude. The parable is aimed at those who think they are very righteous and look down on others. That is the Pharisees. Jews had to pray 3 times a day, and people will go to the temple for private prayer. The Pharisees stood up to pray, which was a usual practice. He prayed about himself, informing God of the wrong things he had not done. I am not like the other men, robbers, evildoers, and adulterers. He went on to speak of the various religious practices he had observed, fasting twice a week, and giving tithes. The Pharisee thought he was praying, but was praising and glorifying himself, thereby exhibiting his egoistic character and behavior. But the tax collector, on the other hand, put his head down and kept hitting himself. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Through my fault, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Thus, he showed how sorry he was. He knew he was a sinner and needed God to forgive him. Nobody can be proud of himself before God. The men went home, but only the tax collector had pleased God, as he had been humble to ask for forgiveness. A person's attitude is very, very important to God. One of the negative effects of the ego is arrogance. What is ego then? Ego means the self, especially with a sense of self-importance. Freud in psychology calls it the most central part of the mind, which mediates with one's surroundings. When the ego dominates our lives, we see the mote in other neighbors' eyes and not a beam in our own. We wrong others and deny that there is any guilt. Others do the same to us and we say that they should have known better. We hate others and call it zeal. We flatter others because of what they can do for us and call it love. We lie to them and call it tact. We then become slow to defend the rights of God in public and call it prudence. We selfishly push others aside and call it getting our just rights. We judge others and say that we are facing the facts. We refuse to give up our life of sin and call anyone who does so an escapist. We overreact and call it health. We pile up more wealth than is necessary for our state in life and call it security. We resent the wealth of others and call ourselves the defenders of the downtrodden. We deny inviolable principles of law, plant our feet firmly in mid-air, and call ourselves liberal. We begin sentences with the eye and condemn our neighbor as a bore for wanting to talk about himself when we want to talk about others. We ruin family life by divorce and say we have to live our own lives. We believe we are virtuous merely because we have found someone who is vicious. Our sloth and laziness we call living sensibly. We want so much to be loved that we forget to love. We nurse our own troubles so much that we fail to see the lovableness of others. We possess money and therefore think we have what? We criticize others unjustly with the excuse that they should have known the truth about themselves. We judge our virtues by the vices from which we abstain. We boast of the tinsel wrapping on the boss of our lives and call it glamour. We refuse to make up our minds about anything and boast that we are being broad-minded. We see ourselves as more righteous and holier than others. We see the fault of others without acknowledging our own unworthiness. We condemn others without condemning ourselves. These and many more are the temptations to which we are all prone when we allow the ego in us to become supreme. Those who glorify the ego or the seeming self often develop a vicarious interest in solving problems that do not concern them, as a substitute for tackling their own problems of selfishness. In talking about people, we often ask, why doesn't he recognize his own faults? The reason is that we have refused to practice self-introspection. Our ego has obscured our eye. Our egoism then drowns out our personality. That is why our Lord warns us in Matthew chapter 7 verse 1. Do not judge others, or you yourself will be judged. The judgment of our neighbor is a self-revelation and thereby a judgment on ourselves. The very touchiness and sensitiveness of some people about themselves, the violent way they react to criticism, is an indication of how much they protect their own false ego, of how little courage they have in daring to let our real self stand the light of the day. Because the ego and the I, or the superficial self and the real self, are related as the husk to the seed, it follows that the I is not revealed until the ego is removed. Ego can be held responsible for many negative human traits, including but not limited to criticism and judging others, acting manipulative, being inflexible and rigid, having severe mood swings, possessing a constant need for praise and approval, need to feel superior to everyone around, feeling fearful, anxious, being uncooperative, taking things too seriously, taking offense easily, constant worrying over little things, feeling resentful towards others, inability to live in the present moments, feeling of hopelessness and despair, and the need for power and control over others. These negative traits have serious consequences and can easily make any person's life a misery. These can lead to self-righteousness, cause reluctance in sinning, addiction to alcohol, tobacco, and other mind-altering substances. Ego has the ability to make one focus on those aspects of the physical world that actually have intolerance towards peace, harmony, and happiness. It acts as a deterrent to progress and should be treated as an adversary. A egoistic person is always quick to blame others or raise their voice against the circumstances when anything bad befalls him or her. This is the